launch team wishes you good luck and Godspeed.
Space monkeys blasting off about blockchain infrastructure and making use of data with James Bailey, head of business development for OnFinality and the SubQuery network. James, thanks for coming on.
Hey Jay, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's very good to have you on. Just getting interested on this channel in the infrastructure that's really going to make this Web3 dream come true. But just to start, I'm kind of curious about when you joined the OnFinality team and kind of what was your journey to joining?
I talk to a lot of people and they always say to me, what's up with you Kiwis? There's a lot of like blockchain companies from New Zealand, like Akala and Country and of course us. It all kind of started this other company that I used to work for, or work in kind of a cousin company of sorts. And from there I met a guy called Sam. And Sam, who's the current CEO of OnFinality and SubQuery, was building something pretty weird and pretty interesting. Kind of piqued my curiosity, and I kind of worked alongside him, but not with him before then. And he asked me one day, "Can you help us out with some business development?" So at the time, what I was doing was like technical product management. I'm a developer. I studied software development at university, but I was pretty lousy at that. I was a pretty terrible software developer.
Okay.
I prefer to talk rather than do stuff. So with the understanding of actually how to write code, I kind of moved into technical product management. Which is kind of deciding how we're going to build it and what we're going to build and trying to explain that. And I've realized a lot of the skills involved with that in terms of selling this idea internally on why we should do something. Those also the business development side. So I joined Sam kind of in a part-time position at the start. And one thing about blockchain is it's never part-time, as you'll know, Jay. Never part-time. So that quickly became a full-time, all-consuming role. And so be it. Here we are today, a year later. I think I joined full-time back in January last year. So it's been a wild ride since then and a lot of fun.
What was the state of SubQuery when you came on board there?
So SubQuery at the time, I was kind of there while we were thinking about it. And our CTO, Ian, and another guy called James, you basically built it over one furious hot summer back in January. Remember, the summers are different here in the south. Like back in January or February, we got the first build out. We started kind of trying it out, playing with it. And one thing that we did at SubQuery and OnFinality is when we build stuff, we make sure we built it for kind of like for customer in mind. And so we were able to talk to Akala pretty early to get them to try it out and give us feedback. But yeah, I generally kind of joined the team just as we were launching the first version of SubQuery, which is exciting.
Taking care of kind of the external communications, that's probably been a big part of your role, hasn't it?
That's exactly right. And as we get bigger, it's interesting how that kind of transitions. I used to write every Medium article and every Twitter post, and I'm terrible at social media, so it's been a fun learning curve. But as you get bigger, it's more around setting a kind of a tone of voice. What does SubQuery want to be seen as? Like, how do we want to be heard? And what kind of messaging do we want to put out there? It's been an interesting transition, but quite fun to kind of set the direction around.
Is there a difference between OnFinality and SubQuery right now, or have they kind of become the same thing?
Well, actually, quite the different opposite. We're trying to separate the two, and we've done a lot of work over the past year. So the backstory was there was a team called OnFinality, and there is still a team called OnFinality that built infrastructure services for Polkadot. So OnFinality, in short, if you go to Polkadot.js, or if you use a wallet like Fearless Wallet, Nova Wallet, all those will interact with the chain. And OnFinality runs a large proportion of the infrastructure services for networks across Polkadot. I think it supports around 50 or 60 different networks. And it supports them through like a load balance API service, but also like node deployment as a service. So if you're looking for an analogy, it's kind of like the Infura and the block daemon of Polkadot rolled together. And we do a lot of work with different teams across Polkadot. But we were building OnFinality, and as we were talking to each customer, and this goes back to that point I made around, it's really important when you build a product to make sure you're building it with the customer or very close to a customer, because it results in a higher likelihood that you achieve something that we call product market fit. And we kept hearing these questions about data indexing. It's this constant problem that these new networks that we're trying to build apps or explorers or whatever, we're all coming across and they're all hitting their head against this wall of data and data availability. And so we started building SubQuery back then it was like 7 people we could fit around on a table and have 2 pieces between us. But now as we get bigger, it's now like 50 people across these 2 teams, and we're splitting them out. So we're having 2 different separate development teams, different kind of product groups, and we're just starting to kind of set these up as independent teams. Now I kind of cross both still, and that'll probably remain for some while. But yeah, we're trying to run them as separate businesses.
Okay, so how would you define the OnFinality mission? And then how would you define the SubQuery mission?
OnFinality is really about building common tools that makes the lives of every developer across Polkadot and other networks easier. So they're very similar missions, but they do it in 2 different ways. So OnFinality's kind of goals around infrastructure tools. So making it easy for them to run, manage, maintain, upgrade, analyze, provision nodes for their new network. So if you're a developer working at home, you don't have to be an expert in AWS. You can use OnFinality and you can set up a build pipeline, and it will create a brand new test network for you as you're developing your network. So that's really good for different Polkadot because, in Polkadot there is this proliferation of different networks that are all slightly different, but run on the same SubQuery code base. SubQuery is very similar but slightly different. SubQuery is all about making data more available, really like making it easy to build applications on data. And the way that we do that is by indexing and analyzing data for our customers, building a really cool open source tool that makes it easy to do this and gives you the freedom to build the application of your dreams the way that you want it in a much faster time frame.
So this data indexing problem, how would you summarize that problem for our audience in just a few words?
Yeah, sure. So you imagine blockchain's like a book, and I want to create a list of all the times that this certain character appears in this book.
Okay.
If you want to go through and create that list, you have to go through every single page, Jay, and you have to look for that character.
Mm-hmm.
That is the exact same problem that, for example, a wallet has, where they want to show a list of the last 10 transactions that you've made. So a blockchain, the way the data is stored in a blockchain makes it incredibly difficult to query because you cannot search it, you cannot sort it, you cannot filter it. You have to go through block by block. You have to brute force that. SubQuery is about taking that data from that book and putting into a spreadsheet. And if you've spent a lot of time in spreadsheets, I've spent a lot of time in spreadsheets in my life, Jay, but if you've spent a lot of time, you know that you can sort, you can search, you can filter, you can do pivot tables, you can do amazing stuff. And then make analyzing data a lot better. And that's the same solution that SubQuery provides to developers using blockchain data.
So you're creating a marketplace for data indexers. I guess in this analogy, the vendors would be indexers.
Correct. So there's different SubQuery projects. And the SubQuery project is this atomic project that is a recipe of how you want your data from where. So your recipe might say, I'm particularly interested in transfer information from Polkadot. I want to know who's made a transfer, how much they transfer, who is the largest transfer, etc. And that's your SubQuery project. It's atomic. And a indexer, you and I, Jame, might be quite good at picking and choosing which projects have got a good demand for them or are quite busy.
Mm-hmm.
And we might go out there and index that particular set of data. And so we say to the world, we've got this data, and the rest of the world will come out to us and kind of ask for it.
So in order to remain decentralized, would a consumer of this data, would they be looking to interact with multiple indexers across the marketplace?
If we want to do this really easily, the simplest way is saying like, okay, every consumer has to pick which indexer they're asking data from.
Yeah.
And, that works. It's okay, but it's a bit boring, a bit slow, and a bit inefficient. And it's got terrible user experience. And I think there's one thing about blockchain, unfortunately, is that we haven't quite cracked the user experience. So we're trying to take it a step further where we have this concept called open agreements. And an open agreement basically is like a many-to-many network. So this data is a commodity. It's like fuel. It's like petrol, okay? You can kind of like dress it up. You can put lipstick on the pig, but it's still the same pig. It's still the same 95 octane gasoline or whatever you put in your car. So regardless of who's offering to sell you it, it's the same product. It's the same data. So you can have many sellers and you can have many buyers. And the SubQuery network, we're trying to build it so that it kind of routes you to the nearest and the best supplier, which results in better user experience, because the main perception of user experience in our world is a time to make that request, the duration of that, and that's quite inspired, or that is kind of controlled by how far away you are from the indexer. So routing users to the nearest indexer, the nearest affordable indexer, will allow us to be faster, more performant, more scalable, everything that you want, really.
What's the process of a project querying data from this marketplace? Are they setting up their own APIs, or are they borrowing from other previously established APIs, or how is that going to work?
So commonly, they'll build their own API, and each subgroup project will give them their own unique data set, uniquely made for their application, so they can be different from the competition, which is really very important. Or they could query, existing data. So one of our most popular data sets is the Crowdloan data. Most applications that you use to interact with the crowd loans, whether they're like things like MarketCap or Interlace tools or Parallel Finances tools or Carla's tools, they all use the same data set for the crowd loan information.
Right.
Which is kind of example of common data across the industry. So they will put out their SubQuery project to the network, say, can you please index this? And someone will hopefully index that. They can index it themselves. And as a result, the SubQuery network itself handles that kind of reward, that transfer of value to reward those indexes appropriately.
I saw that you guys are coming out with a token. Are you guys on your way to becoming your own parachain, or how is that token going to help you solve this indexing problem that you just described?
So we've been building the SubQuery network since the end of 2020. God, these years fly by. And we've always had this view that whatever we build, it has to be decentralized. So it's the most weird paradox right now in blockchain is that all these decentralized applications that run on blockchains, they all rely on centralized services. And when those products go down, which they sometimes do, everyone kind of is like, well, this is actually reliant on the service. And it's not quite as decentralized as I thought. So we've always built SubQuery with that in our mind. And this is culminating in something that we're working on just now. This is our biggest priority for this year. It's a decentralized SubQuery network where anyone, you and I, can offer to index and process and manage data on behalf of another customer, and we can sell that to the SubQuery network. And consumers, whether they're a wallet or the NFT Explorer or whatever, can acquire that data from us. So it's creating a marketplace for that data, and it's trying to do it a better way than what we can do ourselves. And we provide a centralized service already. We do hundreds of millions of requests per day. Most of the apps you use on a daily basis will run through us. And we're running that to a really high reliability, but we believe that it would be better if we decentralize that. And that's what the SubQuery token proposes to enable, is that utility token to reward people when they index data and be the kind of medium or exchange of value. So our immediate plans is to launch on Akala's EVM chain, which is just going live right now. So a common question I always get asked, right? And so like through OnFinality and through SubQuery, we've worked with most teams across the Polkadot ecosystem. We've talked to a lot of them. And I think people underestimate the level of effort involved to launch your own Parachain. It's a huge amount of effort.
Yeah, I think so.
And kind of people throw around this statement like, are you going to launch Parachain? It's like, are you going to go down to the shop and pick up some bread? Like, it's not an easy task. Yes, there are some things that our own Parachain would provide us. There are some benefits that it would provide us. I think it's certainly not a long-term plan. But in order for us to get to market quickly or quicker, which is all very important, launching an existing Parachain is just a lot more efficient. And that is our kind of current priority.
I totally agree with you. And I do think that people have grown tired of people launching parachains before they have anything to show. I think taking baby steps and building a market around the product as you build is definitely the way to go.
Exactly right. And, we've kept that in mind the whole way through, whether it's building a centralized product first, prove that there's use and demand and a lot of interest, to migrating to an existing parachain, to then potentially migrating to our own parachain. These are all baby steps, but rather than go for the big leap at the start, which is a huge risk of failure and things don't go right for all different reasons, we've taken baby steps.
I hear some teams talk about the idea of going from a centralized state to a decentralized state is near impossible. Personally, with my own work, like building WAG Media and everything like that, we're starting centralized and trying to decentralize. There's interesting ideas on both sides of the debate, I think.
Yeah, I disagree with people that think that going from a centralized state to a decentralized state is impossible. I think it's a bit of laziness. It highlights very quickly if there's flaws in the token economic design, because you always have to keep that in mind. We've got some competition in this space, and one of the differences between us and them is that we've always had this decentralization goal in mind. And the way that we've designed and built SubQuery to be a kind of an all-in-one package, atomic project where there's no reliance on a secondary processor or pre-index or whatever you call it, It's not easy to move to this decentralized state because everything you need is in this one project. And any indexer around the world, regardless of if they're in Timbuktu or in Toronto, can run that project and get the exact same result.
Yeah.
And doesn't have to rely on this expensive, heavy data processor. This is really important for us as we kind of proceed along to that quest of decentralization. And it's also a balancing act around what you allow people to do. You could allow people to do whatever the hell they want to do. But one of the key things for SubQuery to be able to run well in a decentralized environment is that it's got to be deterministic. If two people running it as a center, Toronto or Timbuktu must come up with the exact same data set. And if you allow weird and wonderful things to happen during the indexing process, you lose that determinism. So an index coming up later is no longer eligible to join the set, right? Or they can't actually index. You can't actually achieve that goal. Or two indexes start at the same time might be slightly different, which is like, what the hell's going on here? I can't trust any of this data. So having a safe mode where we maintain determinism is quite important for that reason.
Yes, well, we just had who you referred to as them on the show last week. It was a very interesting conversation for sure. And the secondary process to the indexing, they talked about, this sort of efficiency. Do you think there's room in this space for multiple solutions to this indexing problem?
Absolutely. This is like foundational level of like infrastructure to run a project, right? Like, we're taking slightly different approaches to this. Our approach is kind of guided by this idea that we will decentralize our primary product sooner than later, versus theirs is potentially around a bit more freedom. And, if you wanted to index prices from CoinGecko or whatever, if you want to merge the data from an external source, you can do that. By all means, SubQuery, it's very easy. It's just not safe anymore. We class it's not safe. It's not deterministic.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Like, we don't restrict you. We just kind of try to deter you from doing this. As I said, there's plenty of space in this industry, and they're doing a really cool stuff. They're taking some pretty interesting approaches to what they're doing. Yeah, no, it's always good to have this level across us. And of course, there's another competitor, not just in Polkadot, obviously they're not in Polkadot, but in other networks. And SubQuery always have this multi-chain ambition, and we've just moved to Avalanche.
Yeah, I saw that.
We moved to Terra a week before the crash. Like,
damn,
perfect timing from our side.
Ouch.
It's like, okay, there are a lot of really cool projects we're working with in Terra, and we still plan to work with. And we've been talking very close about where they're going, so we'll have more about this very soon. But we have this big goal of multi-chain because there are a lot of other layer ones that, promising, not as promising as Polkadot, of course, it's our home here, but are doing pretty well, that we think have a future. And there are people building over there that they're building like the data dark ages. It's horrible. So we're trying to bring our solution to these other networks.
Very, very cool. What can you tell us about some partners in the Kusama space and how they're using your product in ways that excite you?
Yes. So one of the best things that we have is we have this like live web page. You can go to explorer.subquery.network. If you go to our website, subquery.network, and go to the top, there's a link to an Explorer. And the Explorer is like a live dashboard or viewport of all the different projects that are running a project on a centralized service, a managed service. We're doing somewhere over 300 to 400 million API requests each and every day to the centralized service. And like, just going through the list, like most Parachains will have a project there, like Kala, Moonbeam, Astar, Fala. A lot of teams, there's a lot of like wallets. So Nova Wallet, Fearless Wallet, Sub Wallet, like Metadot as well. Big four wallets all run their services in our hosted service. Explorers like Subscan is starting to replace a lot of the infrastructure with us. Just goes on. There's the thing about SubQuery. We've built the documentation to a level now, and this has always been a big focus for us. It's very boring work, but building documentation is critically important for a tool that we build. And if people can't wield the tool, if they can't use the tool's no good. One of the byproducts of this is that we can now get projects being created using SubQuery that we have no idea about. We kind of like ask them, like, oh, how did you find it? How can we help?
That's cool, yeah.
So Octopus is building quite a few projects and running off that hosted service. Yeah, lots of different teams across any vertical, any like Moonbeam NFT projects, Explorers, like everything has been, it's so strange. We want to build a new part of our website where we kind of show off different projects in each vertical. So like if you want to look for GameFi projects or Metaverse or DeFi, you can kind of look at the top ones. But yeah, big numbers.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about how the token is going to build out a marketplace. I'm sure that's just going to amplify the use cases so far. What else can you tell us about, let's say, the next 6 to 8 months for SubQuery?
So every time I get asked this question, and this has been true for the last 6 months, it's always the same 3 priorities. First is this decentralized network, which is number 1.
Yeah.
We did set out at the start to build this as a decentralized product. We're taking a roundabout path to get there, but it is critically important. And so we've just finished a season or a second season of our test network, where we had about 150 indexes in our test network, which is not a small number, that were indexing data from projects. And we simulated about 200 million API requests in a day to them.
Wow.
So we simulated like real world traffic for our decentralized network. That kind of is enough proof that you need to kind of us to say that this SubQuery network, when it launches, will probably be good enough to cover our existing centralized servers. So that was a good milestone. We're doing season 3 soon, which is kind of like a public round where anyone can join and become an indexer and try it out.
Okay.
And then we'll launch the mainnet and do the token sale later on. We're just trying to set up a launch pad for that at the moment, a token sale kind of place. So that's kind of proceeding quite nicely. The second part is obviously building, improving the core product. And we can never lose sight of this, right? So SubQuery itself is open source. Anyone can use it. You can run it yourself. But, our goal here is to add new features to that. And we're slowly and steadily adding new features. This week we added support for Akala's EVM+. We've added support for historical indexing, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, just new features every month, every week to add new capabilities, improve indexing speed. Really just to create the best indexer out there, not just in Polkadot, but in any network. And finally, obviously building a community, right? Like it's so weird in this decentralized world, Jay. Like when you're building a product in a normal Web 2 world, you don't really give a shit about community. Like it's kind of like an afterthought, right?
Yeah.
But in Web 3, community is everything. Building a tool is nothing without people to understand it and use it, but also people to promote it for you and to share the news about it, and making sure that, we're building quite a detailed technical tool, quite complex, but making sure that we break it down and explain it simply to the average person. It doesn't themselves need indexing, but just so they can understand the value it brings to the community. It's a hard task, but it's critically important to this future of SubQuery. So constantly talking to people like you to try to reach into different markets, different communities, and there are many different communities around crypto that don't really talk to each other, but all talking about the same things, to teach them about SubQuery and to share what we do with them. That's very important for us to share.
So anybody listening who's interested in getting deeper into the tech or just wants to help evangelize the idea, where are the hottest communities you guys are building right now?
We're building a big community. Our primary community is in Discord. And you can join our Discord. It's the biggest link on the footer of our page, our website. That's where our primary community is, about 30,000 people on our Discord. Both real technical people that will provide support, but also non-technical people that are here to raise awareness and spread the word. We've got a sizable Twitter following, but yeah, we're kind of generally active in most areas. It's interesting, your kind of question also alludes to another question, which is like, as we expand to other layer ones, it's kind of interesting seeing, we're kind of in our own world here in Polkadot, and we talk a lot about stuff, and it's somewhat of a bubble. It's a very friendly bubble, very nice bubble, very warm and cozy bubble.
Yeah.
But it's going into these other networks like Avalanche and Terra, where you see these other bubbles kind of all operating and talking about the same things, and the same questions, struggling with the same problems.
Yeah.
But all kind of operating independently. So it's been fascinating, that experience in the past month or so.
How do you find those communities versus the community that's in Kusama?
Kusama certainly is one of the friendliest ones. I don't think there's many other communities I've been to where like a good test is if projects will like suggest other projects. Like you talk to a project team and they're like, oh, you should talk to these guys. I'll offer them an introduction to you and that kind of stuff. And I get that a lot in Kusama, because we're all kind of in this together.
Mm-hmm.
That WAGME attitude is really strong here. Similar things, and we're using the similar kind of code bases and going through the same problems together. But other communities have that to an extent, but not as much as Kusama. But I guess that's also part of like our background, is that as a data indexing tool, as a kind of infrastructure tool, we work for a lot of people and we talk to pretty much everyone, and we try to be very impartial. And you're going to your question at the start, where we're very active in social media, doing a lot of videos. we realized we had to do that because we have a privileged position where we act as a kind of independent mediator. We work with everyone, we work with competitors of each other, but we still work with them and we just provide a tool. And so we have a very privileged position where we can provide impartial thought and bring people together that wouldn't otherwise talk together because we just have a larger customer base than others. So we had to use that in our approach to come out with these videos.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, well, I'll leave links down below for all the content you've been creating, and hopefully we can grow the community on .sama here for you guys a little bit better. James, this has been a fascinating conversation. Just to close this out here, I'm kind of curious about where you personally see .sama and the greater Web3 vision going even further out here, like maybe the next 5 years. What are your hopes and dreams for blockchain technology going forward?
That's a good question. Where I'm from in New Zealand, blockchain's not as big as where it is overseas. And I guess that's because we have very stable governance. We have some pretty good functioning financial systems and legal systems. And so people don't see it as like a better solution. They see it as a weird one. And I think one of the reasons why people see it as a weird solution or something that's just in the realm of tech enthusiasts or crypto nerds like myself is because blockchain still hasn't cracked that usability problem.
Yeah.
User experience is still very detrimental. Not as good in blockchain as it is elsewhere. And I think the real test for us as an industry, if we've cracked it, is if I call it the grandmother and the mother test. If your mother, or even better, your grandmother can start using and interacting with blockchain applications without really knowing about it. And that's kind of one of the driving goals of SubQuery is to enable that. By allowing you to use that data in a better way, you can build more intuitive apps to have a better user experience. So for us to crack it, we've got to get to that point. And I think that's where we'll see a lot of the growth in the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. We've built all these different protocols and these networks, and there's only so many times you can increase the block production rate and increase the transaction throughput or whatever. These developer metrics that we love and they're easy to maximize for. But as we mature as an industry over the next 5 years, I think the focus will shift more towards, okay, these non-kind of quantitative things, these qualitative measures like usability, accessibility, inclusiveness, and how far has blockchain adoption increased through different environments, through different countries and different regions. So I think that's where the focus will be in the next 5 years, is more around the user experience and how that drives adoption rather than features and functionality and all that stuff.
And I guess if we have any hope at that future, the important work you guys are doing at SubQuery, that's going to make it possible by making the front ends a lot quicker and smoother and more pleasurable to use.
Kind of like in the late 90s, the internet.com era, right? There's all these like crazy applications, pets.com, all these like hot shit websites that everyone's getting really excited about. And we might be going through that crash right now, but regardless, behind the scenes, there's a lot of people building some really, really cool things, but specifically on the infrastructure side, right? So blockchains themselves, decentralized exchanges, indexing tools like SubQuery, infrastructure tools like OnFinality. These infrastructure pieces are going to outlive any peaks and troughs, any bull runs or bear runs, and they're going to set the scene, set the foundations for a better future.
Well, James, it was very, very interesting talking to you today, and I want to thank you very much for coming in and sharing the SubQuery story with everybody here. And I really hope that in 6 or 8 months, especially when you get the market set up there and the token out, we can come back and check in and we can talk again soon.
Yeah, and that sounds good, Jay. We'll see what we've learned and what we would do better next time.